mutilation.
Come here.
You always wanted to know, though, what happened, didn't you? Oliver Cornock is here, managing editor of the Oxford Business Group. Good morning, Oliver.
Good morning.
The decision pretty much went the way most people expected, and I don't think there was a single positive thing the tribunal had to say about what China's been doing in the South China Sea.
No, indeed. They lost on nearly every point, and you said a huge diplomatic blow. This is also a huge loss of face for Xi and the Chinese. And what's interesting looking at this is, will this just simply increase the tensions that are already quite high? It plays very much into what the US is doing, this pivot to East Asia that they've been pursuing. A lot of US forces down there, ships monitoring. Although on the flip side, it will be very reassuring for the governments of Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Brunei, all of those ones that are on this disputed area. And let's be honest, it's 90% of the South Asian Sea. I mean, that's South China Sea. That's a huge area. So a very mixed story, but either way, a huge blow to Beijing. And the question is, what's next?
They're just ignoring this, aren't they?
They seem to ignore an awful lot of other international decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting. They say that they're going to carry on. In fact, they've been quite belligerent and saying, do not move against us. Although they have made another statement in the past hour or so, and our correspondent in Beijing says they haven't said that they're going to increase any of their military activity in the South China Sea, but it's going to roll on for a long time. Let's remember there was only one case brought by the Philippines about one particular area. There's a lot longer to go in this story. And there might be a lot longer to go in British politics as well.
Absolutely, and especially if you're a lady. These headlines this morning are very positive. Of course, I sort of rather cynically now, after so long focused on this post-Brexit scenario, very fast-moving story, I'm suddenly less worried about what gender the Prime Minister is. Like investors, we're looking for stability, and whoever the Prime Minister is, Mrs May, whether the ministers she appoints are male or female, they have to get a grip on this situation. We have to get some clarity on when Article 50 will be engendered. All of these things at a time when there is no opposition in the UK, and I think that's a very important point. Whatever the colour of your politics, to have quite a robust opposition is very important, and I think that's missing at the moment.
It's quite interesting, actually, because quite a few papers have picked out this line that the FT's picked out, looking at the front of the eye, women first in May's cabinet. It talks about the fact that there could be gender parity for the first time in a cabinet. How important is that, do you think? I mean, I know you've made the point, what everybody, I'm sure, agrees with. The most important thing is we have the right people, regardless, to sort of steer the UK through this chapter in its history.
But I think you're picking up I think, yes, absolutely, it must be important to have the right people. At the same time, there is a huge cynicism about British politics at the moment. Indeed, there's a huge cynicism about global politicians at the moment. And therefore, I think this would be a very important step along the way to getting some sort of rebalance. To have gender parity, a reflection of society, would surely be well on the road to getting some sort of redress.
It's quite interesting, actually, that it's the first female Prime Minister we've had in quite some time, only the second one we will have had in our history. And in the US, they haven't got there yet. They may get there in November. But it's quite interesting how in these countries, when you look at the rest of the world, how there are many women running countries all over the world, and yet the United States has not achieved that goal yet, and the UK has only just got it second.
And interestingly, a number of emerging markets, a number of the markets Oxford Business Group looks at, we have a number of female heads of state.
Yes, we certainly do. Yeah. We've talked about this a few times, haven't we? And in fact, that takes us on to the International New York Times, because Bernie Sanders, finally, after running against Hillary Clinton for the Democratic Party's nomination, has said Hillary will be a great president, vote for her. But the story we're actually looking at, and you have a very interesting angle on this, I think. Barack Obama in Dallas for the memorial service of 5 white officers killed by a black man who told police that he specifically wanted to kill white police officers. And your angle is that you were in New York while the shootings in Dallas were happening. What about the different ways that it was being covered in the American media? Because we know that some networks are very right-wing, some networks are more central, and that there is a divide in the States, and that's reflected also in the way the media covers these stories.
Absolutely. You flick between channels in your hotel room, between CNN, Fox News, whoever you're looking at, and it's an amazing difference in how these stories are reflected, and again, testimony to the very divided nature of whatever Hillary Clinton or, dare I say, Donald Trump might be inheriting. This huge disparity, black and white, some of these lines, these civil rights movement lines that we thought were a thing of the past, clearly aren't. And of course, a nightmare scenario, I suppose, for Mr. Obama in his final few months.
A nightmare scenario, but he was really trying to bring home the message, wasn't he, that things are not as bad as this scenario paints. Is he just trying to be extremely optimistic, and is that a PR exercise, or is that really the case? That's the question.
I mean, the simple fact is that the vast majority of cops are not skewed, but all you need is a couple of bad apples. We know that. But getting that message over to the people of Minnesota at the moment, the people of Oklahoma, that is going to be very hard.
Absolutely, and Louisiana as well, and, you know, around the country, absolutely.
Talk about Ireland. This is quite an amusing tale, isn't it? A massive growth number, way larger than any other economy in the world, and yet it's skewed, isn't it?
Clearly, we're talking about Leprechaun Economics. We heard about the Celtic Tiger. I love these titles that we get, especially when they're about the Emerald Isle. Yeah, 26% growth, of course, is slightly skewed because of all of the way it's been done. It's got a very favourable corporate tax environment, remember, in Ireland, and this has meant that an awful lot of companies...
Favourable and controversial.
Well, absolutely controversial, and you can see why it's controversial. A lot of corporates have based things, they've offshored things, you know, aircraft leasing, things like that are quite tax efficient to be done in Ireland, and therefore this has skewed things. 102% increase in exports and things like that. I mean, really bonkers figures. The real point though is here, if you're an Irish person living in rural Ireland, you might well say, where's this 26%? Because actually, if you go to Ireland, this isn't trickling out of into Dublin, let alone into the Pale, as they would say.
And that's the problem in many economies, isn't it? Some would argue that's the problem in our economy, why many people voted to leave.
Absolutely.
Starry, Starry Night's one of my favourite songs of all time by Don McLean about the great Vincent van Gogh. It was 1888 when he mutilated himself because of issues that he was having in his mind, and now we know the full story.
Exactly. I'd always understood it was just this sort of a symbolic nip of the ear, but we now learn from this letter that's in this exhibition that this was a sort of full-on amputation. So very much the reflection of a very tortured mind, one assumes. Taking a nip off an ear rather than severing the whole thing is quite different. We also then read that, and see the weapon he used to kill himself. And I think this is, you know, an amazing artist, obviously. We all know those iconic pictures. But then we see this tortured mind, and it's a reflection often that a lot of people with huge artistic skill, the ability to entertain millions of people, have got very tortured internal problems.
It is.
It's fascinating, isn't it, when you get this new detail on something that happened such a long time ago.
That's right. By the way, if you come to London, go to the Courtauld Institute and you can see the self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh with the bandage over his ear. Oliver, always a massive pleasure to see you. That's not an understatement.
You too.
Thanks a lot.
Big pleasure. Have a really good day, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.